My father framing me for a crime gave me my freedom. The flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror made my stomach drop, but not for the reason you'd think. I pulled over on Elm Street, right in front of the Hendersons' perfectly manicured lawn, and watched Officer Martinez approach my BMW. The same Officer Martinez who'd been to our house for Dad's charity fundraisers. The same one who always complimented Mom's catering. "Evening, Alex," he said, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something colder. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "What's this about?" I asked, though part of me already knew. The argument with Dad 3 hours earlier kept replaying in my head. Asterisk, you'll learn respect one way or another, Alexandra. Mark my words, asterisk. We received a tip about illegal substances in your vehicle. Please step back. I watched in surreal fascination as Martinez and his partner, Officer Chen, searched my car with practiced efficiency. It took them exactly 4 minutes to find the small baggie tucked under my passenger seat. 4 minutes to pull out what looked like marijuana, something I'd never touched in my 17 years of existence. "This yours?" Martinez held up the baggie, and I saw something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or pity. No. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I've never seen that before in my life. The laugh that escaped me wasn't humor, it was the sound of something breaking. Of course Dad had done this. Of course he'd found a way to make it look legitimate. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, pillar of the community, would never frame his own daughter. Except he absolutely would. They cuffed me right there on Elm Street, where Mrs. Henderson was definitely watching from behind her curtains, already composing the text she'd sent to her book club. By tomorrow morning, half of Westfield would know that the Blackwood girl had been arrested for possession. The holding cell at the county jail smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat on the metal bench for 3 hours before Dad's lawyer, Gerald Hutchinson, showed up with his practiced smile and expensive briefcase. "This is all a misunderstanding," he assured me, though he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Your father is concerned about your recent behavior. The charges will likely be dropped due to insufficient evidence, but he wants you to understand the seriousness of the situation." That's when it clicked. Dad hadn't just planted evidence, he'd made sure it wouldn't stick. This was theater. A performance designed to scare me back into line, to make me grateful when he swooped in to save me from consequences he'd orchestrated. The charges were dropped at 9:47 a.m. the next morning, exactly as Gerald had predicted. I walked out of that courthouse into the crisp October air, and Dad was waiting by his Bentley, arms crossed, wearing his disappointed father expression like a costume. "I hope you've learned something from this experience," he said as I approached. "Rebellion has consequences, Alexandra. Real consequences." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside my chest. The fear that had controlled me for 17 years evaporated, replaced by something harder. Clearer. "You're right, Dad," I said quietly. "I have learned something." He smiled, thinking he'd won. Thinking his brilliant manipulation had worked perfectly. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. The ride home was silent except for Dad's self-satisfied humming of some classical piece, probably Mozart, because Richard Blackwood only appreciated the refined composers. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, Willowbrook Estates, where every house cost more than most people made in a decade and every family had at least 3 cars in their circular driveways. When we pulled through our iron gates, the ones with the elaborate, bead monogram that Dad had commissioned for $30,000, Mom was waiting on the front steps. Patricia Blackwood looked every inch the pharmaceutical heiress she was, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most cars. "Thank God you're safe," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like Chanel No. 5 and felt like performance art. "We were so worried when we heard about your mistake." My mistake. Not Dad's setup. Not his manipulation. My mistake. "I'm fine, Mom." I pulled back and studied her face, looking for any sign that she knew what Dad had done. But Patricia Blackwood was either the best actress in Connecticut or genuinely believed her husband's version of events. Given that she'd been swallowing his lies for 23 years of marriage, I suspected the latter. "We need to discuss your future," Dad said, loosening his tie as we walked into the marble foyer. "This incident has made it clear that you need more structure. More discipline." Here it comes, I thought. I've been in contact with Colonel Morrison at Whitmore Military Academy in Virginia. They have an opening in their January class. Military school. I kept my voice level, interested. "That's actually not a bad idea." Dad blinked. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. "You'd be away from these negative influences," he continued, regaining his rhythm. "Away from whatever friends have been leading you astray." "What friends?" I wanted to ask. "The ones you've systematically scared away over the years. The study groups you forbade me from joining. The social events you deemed inappropriate for a Blackwood." Instead, I nodded thoughtfully. "When would I leave?" "January 15th, Mom said, consulting her phone. "Your father has already put down the deposit. $35,000 for the semester." Of course he had. Richard Blackwood never made threats he couldn't follow through on. Which meant I had exactly 2.5 months to execute the plan that was already forming in my mind. "I should probably get some rest," I said. "Yesterday was a lot to process." "Of course, sweetheart." Dad's smile was warm now, paternal. He thought he'd broken me. "Why don't you take the day off school? I'll call Principal Garrett." I climbed the curved staircase to my room, passing the family portraits that lined the wall. 3 generations of Blackwood staring down with identical expressions of cold ambition. Great-grandfather Edmund, who'd built the family fortune through steel and questionable labor practices. Grandfather William, who diversified into pharmaceuticals and defense contracts. And Dad, who turned those businesses into an empire worth $340 million. An empire built on secrets. In my room, I locked the door and went straight to my closet. Behind the designer dresses and Italian shoes that I'd never asked for, I found what I was looking for, a small fireproof safe that Dad didn't know existed. Inside were 3 years' worth of photographs, documents, and audio recordings. 3 years of being the perfect, invisible daughter who nobody noticed slipping in and out of dad's study. 3 years of evidence that would destroy Richard Blackwood completely. I pulled out the first folder, labeled Cayman Islands, 2019 to 2022, and smiled. Game on, Dad. The first document in my Cayman Islands folder was a photocopy of a wire transfer receipt, $2.3 million from Blackwood Industries to something called Meridian Holdings LLC, dated March 15, 2021. I remembered that day perfectly because it was my 15th birthday, and Dad had spent the entire party on his phone in his study while Mom made excuses about important business calls. I'd been looking for the bathroom upstairs, our powder room was occupied, when I'd heard him through his study door, speaking in the low, careful tone he used for his shadiest dealings. The quarterly reports can't show this kind of discrepancy, Marcus. Find another way to categorize it. That was the first time I'd realized that my father's business calls weren't always legitimate business. Now, 2.5 years later, I had documentation of 17 different shell companies, all registered in the Cayman Islands, all receiving regular transfers from Blackwood Industries. Conservative estimate. Dad had moved at least $30 million offshore in the past 3 years alone. But tax evasion was just the appetizer. I opened the second folder, Pentagon Contracts, Quality Issues. This one made my stomach turn every time I looked at it. Medical supplies that didn't meet FDA standards being sold to military bases overseas. Defective body armor that had been rejected by the Army but somehow found its way to private military contractors in Syria. The smoking gun was a recorded phone call from last December, Dad's voice crystal clear thanks to the voice recorder app I'd started running whenever I cleaned his study. Look, General Peterson, what they don't know won't hurt them. These vests meet 80% of the specifications, and 80% is better than nothing. You get your equipment delivered on time, I get my payment processed before the quarterly audit. Everyone wins. Except for the soldiers who might die wearing defective armor, apparently. My hands were shaking as I opened the third folder. This was the nuclear option, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, clinical trial manipulation. Mom's side of the family business, the one that had developed 3 breakthrough cancer treatments in the past decade. The breakthrough treatments that had skipped crucial safety testing phases. I had photographs of falsified lab reports, emails discussing acceptable casualty rates in human trials, and financial records showing payments to FDA inspectors who had mysteriously overlooked critical safety violations. The most damning piece was a handwritten note in Dad's distinctive scrawl, Patricia's conscience is becoming a liability. Handle this delicately, we can't afford delays on the Morrison trial. 6 months to market, whatever it takes. The Morrison trial. Named after my great-aunt who had died of brain cancer when I was 12. Mom had been so proud of the drug they developed in her memory, had talked endlessly about how it would save lives. She had no idea that Dad had bribed officials to rush it through approval, that the safety data was completely fabricated. A soft knock on my door made me jump. Alexandra? Mom's voice, concerned. Are you feeling all right? You missed lunch. I glanced at my phone, 2:17 p.m. I'd been up here for 5 hours, lost in Dad's web of corruption. Just tired, Mom. I'll be down in a few minutes. Your father had to fly to D.C. unexpectedly, she continued through the door. Something about a Pentagon meeting. He'll be back Thursday. Perfect. That gave me 3 days to set everything in motion. I gathered all the folders and locked them back in a safe, but not before photographing the most crucial documents with my phone. Then I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The FBI's financial crimes tip line was surprisingly easy to find. I stared at the submission form for a long moment, cursor blinking in the description of criminal activity field. Once I hit send, there would be no going back. No family dinners, no trust fund, no safety net. But also no more lies. No more manipulation. No more being a prisoner in a mansion. I started typing. My name is Alexandra Blackwood, and I have evidence that my father, Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, has been engaged in systematic tax fraud, bribery of federal officials, and endangering military personnel through the sale of defective equipment. I deleted the draft 3 times before I realized my hands were shaking. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. The Pentagon Contracts folder contained purchase orders for equipment headed to Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan, the same base where Mom's nephew Jake was stationed. My cousin Jake, who sent us selfies in his gear every month, always smiling despite being in a war zone. Jake, who might be wearing the defective body armor my father had knowingly sold to his unit. The thought made me physically sick. I ran to my bathroom and dry heaved over the marble sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked like Mom, same green eyes, same stubborn chin, but I had Dad's dark hair and his ability to compartmentalize. Right now, I needed that cold calculation more than Mom's conscience. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Emma, heard about yesterday, are you okay? My mom said you were arrested. Emma Chen, whose father owned the biggest law firm in Hartford. Whose mother served on the hospital board with mine. Whose family had no idea that their perfect lives were built on the same foundation of secrets and lies as everyone else in Westfield. I typed back, all good, just a misunderstanding. Talk later, The lie came so easily. I was definitely Richard Blackwood's daughter. Instead of submitting the FBI tip, I opened a new browser window and searched for federal whistleblower protection laws. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. I needed to protect myself legally before I destroyed my family financially. What I found was both encouraging and terrifying. The Federal False Claims Act offered protection for whistleblowers reporting government contract fraud, but the penalties for filing false claims were severe. I'd need ironclad evidence, not just photocopies and recordings that could be dismissed as fabrications. I needed Dad's actual files. The originals. His study was directly below my room, separated by hardwood floors and 18-inch ceiling joists. But the heating vents connected our floors, and sound traveled both ways. I could hear him down there during his late-night calls, which meant I could monitor the room even when he was home. The real treasure trove would be his personal safe, not the obvious one behind the Monet in his office, but the one he thought nobody knew about. The floor safe beneath the Persian rug, hidden under a loose floorboard that creaked when he stepped on it. I discovered it 2 years ago when I was returning a book I'd borrowed without permission. But accessing it would require knowing the combination, and Dad wasn't careless with his secrets. Except, he was predictable with his passwords. His laptop, Patricia 2299, Mom's name plus their wedding date. His phone, Blackwood 1847, the year his great-grandfather founded the company. His offshore banking app, Alexandra 0405, my name and birthday, which had surprised and disturbed me when I'd accidentally seen him enter it. If the safe combination followed the same pattern, it would be something personally significant but professionally relevant. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down possibilities. Edmund 1847, great-grandfather's name and company founding date. Patricia 1976, Mom's birth year. Blackwood 340, company valuation in millions. Alexandra 0405, my birthday again. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize, asterisk this is Colonel Morrison from Whitmore Academy. Your father asked me to reach out directly. Looking forward to meeting you in January. Discipline builds character, asterisk. The military school reminder felt like a countdown timer. 73 days until I'd be locked away in Virginia, cut off from any evidence, any allies, any chance of exposing the truth. I looked at my laptop screen, at the half-completed FBI tip form, and made my decision. But I wasn't going to submit it yet. First, I was getting those original documents. Tonight, while Dad was in D.C. kissing up to Pentagon officials with blood money, I was going to crack his safe. The house felt different with Dad gone, less oppressive, like I could finally breathe without measuring each exhale. Mom had retreated to her art studio after dinner, classical music drifting through the walls as she lost herself in watercolors. It was her way of coping with stress, and yesterday's incident had definitely stressed her. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. At 11:47 p.m., I crept downstairs in my socks, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The marble foyer felt arctic under my feet, moonlight streaming through the crystal chandelier and casting prismatic shadows on the walls. Dad's study door was slightly ajar. He never locked it when he wasn't home, trusting that Mom and I would never dare enter his sanctuary uninvited. If only he knew. I slipped inside and closed the door, then pulled out my phone's flashlight. The Persian rug was exactly where I remembered, an antique Tabriz that Dad claimed was worth more than most people's houses. I rolled it back carefully, revealing the hardwood beneath. There, the loose floorboard, slightly warped from age. I pried it up with a letter opener from Dad's desk, and sure enough, the digital safe sat nestled in the cavity below. A SentrySafe X055, military grade according to its label, with an electronic keypad that glowed green in the darkness. I tried Edmund 1847 first. The keypad flashed red and beeped softly. Wrong. Patricia 1976. Red flash, beep. My palms were sweating as I entered Blackwood 340. Red again. 3 strikes and most safes would lock you out temporarily, triggering security protocols. I hesitated, finger hovering over the keypad. If I was wrong about Alexandra 0405, I might set off some kind of alarm. But something nagged at me about the other possibilities. Dad was sentimental in twisted ways, but he was also paranoid about security. He wouldn't use something as obvious as company names or family birthdays for his most sensitive safe. I closed my eyes and thought about what mattered most to Richard Blackwood. Not his family, we were tools, investments to be managed. Not even his company, not really. What mattered was control. Power. The moment he'd seized that power. The hostile takeover. January 15, 1994. The day Dad had orchestrated a boardroom coup against his own father, wresting control of Blackwood Industries through a combination of legal maneuvering and financial pressure. I'd heard the story a dozen times at family gatherings, how he'd modernized the company vision and eliminated outdated leadership structures. What he'd actually done was destroy his father's reputation and health in one brutal power play. Grandfather William had died of a heart attack 6 months later, broken and humiliated. January 15th. 011594, the keypad flashed green, and I heard a soft mechanical click. The safe door swung open. Inside was a treasure trove that made my folders look like amateur hour. USB drives labeled with dates and locations, Pentagon 2019 to 2022, Cayman transfers, FDA correspondence. A thick manila envelope marked insurance policies, and I had a sinking feeling it wasn't about fire and flood coverage. I grabbed everything, stuffing it all into a canvas tote bag I'd brought. At the very bottom of the safe was a leather-bound journal, Dad's handwriting covering page after page of what looked like confessions wasn't the right word. Justifications, maybe. Rationalizations for every corrupt decision, every bribe, every life put at risk for profit. One entry, dated 3 weeks ago, made my blood freeze. Asterisk Alexandra's rebellion is becoming problematic. She asks too many questions, shows up in places she shouldn't be. Patricia thinks it's normal teenage curiosity, but I know better. She has my instincts for finding weakness. The military school solution is temporary. I may need more permanent measures to ensure family security, asterisk. More permanent measures. I photographed that page with shaking hands, then grabbed the journal too. Whatever Dad meant by permanent measures, I wasn't sticking around to find out. As I replaced the floorboard and rug, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Having a productive evening, Alexandra. My heart stopped. The timestamp showed 12:23 a.m. Dad wasn't supposed to be back from D.C. until Thursday. Another message appeared, asterisk my study. Now, asterisk. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The tote bag full of evidence suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The study had only one exit, and Dad's voice was already echoing from the marble foyer. I know you're in there, Alexandra. His footsteps approached with the measured pace of someone who held all the cards. I had maybe 30 seconds before he reached the door. 30 seconds to figure out how I was going to explain why I was in his study at 12:23 a.m. with a bag full of his most incriminating secrets. The window. Second story, but there was a trellis outside that led down to Mom's rose garden. I'd climbed it before when I was younger, sneaking out to meet friends that Dad later forbade me from seeing. My hands fumbled with the latch, but it was painted shut, probably hadn't been opened in years. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dad's voice was right outside the door now. I shoved the tote bag behind his massive oak desk and tried to look casual, but my heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it through the walls. When the door opened, Richard Blackwood stood silhouetted in the doorway like some Victorian villain, still wearing his charcoal business suit despite the late hour. Interesting outfit for a midnight visit, he said, taking in my black leggings and hoodie. Almost like you were planning something that required stealth. I couldn't sleep, I said, proud that my voice came out steady. I was looking for something to read. Dad's laugh was sharp and humorless. In my study. When you have an entire library upstairs. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Try again. Fine. I wanted to understand what happened yesterday. Why you? I caught myself before finishing that sentence, but Dad's eyes lit up with something that might have been pride. Why I what, Alexandra? Why I taught you a valuable lesson about consequences. Why you framed your own daughter for drug possession. The words hung in the air between us like a live grenade. Dad's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He moved to his desk, directly where I'd hidden the evidence, and sat down in his leather chair with the casual authority of a king claiming his throne. That's a very serious accusation, he said. The kind that could ruin relationships. Destroy trust. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. The kind that might indicate you're having some sort of psychological break. I'm not crazy, Dad. No, you're not. You're smart. Too smart for your own good, just like your grandfather always said I was. He set the recorder on the desk between us, red light blinking. But intelligence without wisdom is dangerous, Alexandra. It makes people think they can outsmart systems that are much bigger than they are. My eyes darted to the floor where his safe lay hidden beneath the Persian rug. Had he noticed the rug's position was slightly off? Was this all an elaborate test? I called Colonel Morrison tonight, Dad continued conversationally. Told him there'd been a change of plans. You'll be leaving for Whitmore on Monday instead of January. Monday. The word came out as a croak. That's 4 days from now. Plenty of time to pack. The school has an excellent psychiatric evaluation program. They'll help determine if you're experiencing paranoid delusions or just garden-variety teenage rebellion. His smile was arctic. Either way, you'll get the help you need. Behind his chair, I could see the corner of my tote bag peeking out from behind the desk. One glance down and he'd see everything. Game over. What if I refuse to go? Then I'll have Dr. Morrison declare you a danger to yourself and others. Involuntary commitment to Fairfield Hills Psychiatric Hospital, minimum 6-month evaluation period. He leaned forward, and for the first time in my life, I saw something genuinely frightening in my father's eyes. Trust me, Alexandra. Military school is the better option. The threat hung between us like a blade, and I realized with crystal clarity that my father wasn't just controlling, he was genuinely dangerous. The psychiatric hospital wasn't an idle threat. Richard Blackwood had the connections, the money, and the complete lack of conscience to have his own daughter declared mentally incompetent. You can't just lock me away because I'm not the perfect daughter you ordered, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew he absolutely could. I can do whatever is necessary to protect this family's interests. Dad picked up a silver letter opener from his desk, turning it over in his hands like he was examining a rare artifact. Your great-grandfather understood that sometimes family members become liabilities. Your grandfather never learned that lesson, which is why I had to teach it to him. The casual way he mentioned destroying his own father made my skin crawl. You killed Grandpa William. I removed an obstacle to progress. There's a difference. He set down the letter opener with deliberate precision. William was weak, sentimental. He would have run this company into the ground with his ethical concerns and outdated business practices. He had a heart attack because He had a heart attack because he was 73 years old and couldn't handle the stress of change. Dad's voice remained perfectly level, like we were discussing the weather. But his death taught me something valuable about family management. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is remove someone from a situation that's beyond their capabilities. The recorder kept blinking its red light, documenting what sounded like a confession but was probably just Dad building a case for my paranoid delusions. Every word I'd spoken tonight would be twisted into evidence of my unstable mental state. I've already spoken with Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Fairfield Hills, he continued. Explained your recent behavioral changes, your wild accusations against family members, your apparent break from reality. She's very concerned about your well-being. Dr. Hendricks. I knew that name. She'd been a guest at several of Dad's charity fundraisers, always hanging on his every word, laughing too loudly at his jokes. Another person in his web of influence. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I didn't become worth $340 million by leaving things to chance, Alexandra. Dad glanced at his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. It's late, and we both have a busy day tomorrow. You'll want to start packing, and I have calls to make. The Whitmore Academy helicopter will pick you up Monday at 7 a.m. Helicopter. Of course Dad would arrange private air transport to make sure I couldn't run, couldn't change my mind, couldn't reach out to anyone for help during the journey. I stood up slowly, trying to look defeated while mentally calculating angles. The tote bag was still hidden behind his desk, but I'd never get it past him now. All that evidence, the USB drives, the journal, the proof of his corruption, would disappear the moment I left this room. There is one alternative, Dad said as I reached for the door handle. If you're willing to demonstrate that you've learned from your mistakes. I turned back, hope and suspicion warring in my chest. What kind of alternative? A public apology. To me, to your mother, to the officers who wasted their time on your drug possession charge. Full acceptance of responsibility for your recent behavior, acknowledgement that stress made you imagine conspiracies that don't exist. His smile was razor thin. Do that convincingly, and maybe we can discuss a less intensive, educational environment. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit and apologize for telling the truth. I want you to choose reality over fantasy. But the choice is entirely yours. Dad picked up his phone and started scrolling through contacts. Colonel Morrison is expecting my call by 8 a.m. tomorrow to confirm your arrival details. Dr. Hendricks has penciled in Tuesday for your psychiatric evaluation. The question is which conversation I'll be having. The recording device kept blinking, capturing my silence, my hesitation, everything that would later be presented as evidence of my guilt or instability. Dad had orchestrated this entire confrontation, probably from the moment he received whatever alert had told him I was in his study. I need time to think, I said finally. Until 8 a.m. That's. He checked his Patek Philippe again, 7 hours and 37 minutes. More than enough time to make the right decision. I left the study on shaking legs, climbed the stairs to my room, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I realize I was still holding my phone, that I'd been clutching it so tightly my knuckles had gone white. 7 hours and 37 minutes to figure out how to beat a man who held every advantage, who controlled every system I might turn to for help. 7 hours to save myself from disappearing completely. I sat on my bedroom floor at 1:17 a.m., staring at my phone and trying not to panic. The evidence was gone, Dad knew everything, and I had less than 7 hours before he shipped me off to military school or a psychiatric hospital. Every door seemed to lead to a dead end. But then I remembered something Dad had said, intelligence without wisdom is dangerous. He was right. I'd been playing his game by his rules, trying to outsmart him with evidence and legal channels. But Richard Blackwood didn't just have money and connections, he had decades of experience crushing people who threatened him. Going head-to-head with him was like bringing a knife to a nuclear war. I needed to change the game entirely. My laptop was still open to the FBI tip form I'd never submitted. Instead of closing it, I opened a new tab and navigated to a different website, WikiLeaks submission portal. Then another, ProPublica's secure drop. Then the Washington Post's confidential tip line. If Dad wanted to control the narrative, I'd give him more narratives than he could possibly manage. But I needed those files back first. I pulled up the security app on my phone, the one that connected to our house's camera system. Dad had insisted on installing it after a break-in 3 streets over, claiming it was for our safety. What he probably didn't realize was that I'd figured out the admin password months ago, Blackwood 1847, same pattern as everything else. The study camera showed Dad's empty chair, but the motion sensors indicated he'd left the room at 12:47 a.m. 23 minutes ago. The timestamp on his bedroom camera showed him entering at 12:52 a.m., and there'd been no movement since. He was either asleep or working on his laptop in bed, either way, this might be my only chance. I crept back downstairs at 1:31 a.m., my heart hammering against my ribs. The study door was closed now, but not locked. Inside, everything looked exactly as we'd left it, except for one crucial detail, the Persian rug was perfectly aligned again. Dad had found my evidence. Behind his desk, the space where I'd hidden the tote bag was empty except for a single sheet of paper, a printed email from Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Fairfield Hills Psychiatric Hospital. Asterisk Richard, reviewed the preliminary assessment materials for your daughter. Based on the behavioral indicators you've described, paranoid delusions, accusations against family members, apparent break from reality, I concur that immediate evaluation is warranted. I've cleared my Tuesday schedule for a comprehensive psychiatric assessment. The evidence of her fantasy conspiracy theories that you mentioned will be helpful in determining appropriate treatment protocols. Best regards, Patricia, asterisk. My hands shook as I read it. Dad had already sent her my accusations, probably framed as delusional ravings of an unstable teenager. Even if I tried to contact her directly, she'd see me as a psychiatric patient making wild claims about my father. But something about the email felt wrong. The timestamp showed it had been sent at 11:43 p.m. tonight, just 4 minutes before Dad had texted me in the study. That was impossibly fast for a doctor to review materials, form a professional opinion, and clear her schedule. Unless the email had been written before our confrontation. Unless Dad had been planning this psychiatric angle for weeks. I photographed the email and started searching his desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, tucked inside a folder marked Personal, I found what I was looking for, 3 more printed emails from Dr. Hendricks, all discussing my deteriorating mental state, all dated from the past 2 weeks. Before I'd even accessed his safe. Before tonight's confrontation. Dad hadn't caught me stealing evidence and improvised the psychiatric hospital threat. He'd been building a case for my involuntary commitment regardless, probably since the moment he decided military school wasn't enough to control me. The realization hit me like ice water, this wasn't about punishment or teaching me lessons. Richard Blackwood was systematically erasing me, removing me as a threat to his empire with the same calculated precision he'd used to destroy his own father. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, asterisk can't sleep, keep thinking about what happened to you yesterday. Want to talk, asterisk. Emma. Whose father ran the biggest law firm in Hartford. Whose family had resources Dad couldn't completely control. I typed back quickly, asterisk yes, can you meet me somewhere? It's important, asterisk. Asterisk my dad's office. I have keys, we'd be alone, asterisk. Asterisk perfect. 20 minutes, asterisk. See you there. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the door, but paused at Dad's desk. The letter opener he'd been playing with earlier was still there, silver and sharp and somehow symbolic of everything wrong with his family. On impulse, I picked it up and slipped it into my hoodie pocket. Not as a weapon, I wasn't Dad. But as a reminder that some lines, once crossed, changed you forever. At 2:03 a.m., I walked out of Richard Blackwood's house for what I knew would be the last time. By morning, one of us was going to destroy the other. I just had to make sure it wasn't me. Chen, Morrison and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of Hartford's sleekest office building, all glass and steel reaching toward the pre-dawn darkness. Emma was waiting in the lobby at 2:23 a.m., her black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing Princeton sweatpants and the kind of worried expression I'd only seen once before, when her grandmother had been hospitalized last spring. You look terrible, she said, which was probably true. I'd thrown on jeans and a jacket over my hoodie, but I could feel the exhaustion pulling at my features, the weight of everything I discovered making my shoulders sag. Thanks. You look like you raided a laundry basket. Fair point. Emma swiped her keycard at the security turnstile. Dad's been working late on some corporate fraud case, so I've been sleeping here half the week. The client couches are actually pretty comfortable. Corporate fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me. We rode the elevator to the 32nd floor in silence. Emma's father's corner office overlooked the Connecticut River, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that probably cost more per square foot than most apartments. I'd been here before for family gatherings. David Chen and my parents moved in the same social circles, though I was beginning to understand that Dad's version of business relationships might be more complicated than simple networking. Okay, Emma said, settling into her father's leather chair while I took the client's seat across from his mahogany desk. Start from the beginning. What really happened yesterday? So I told her. Everything. The planted drugs, the arrest, Dad's threat about military school, tonight's confrontation in his study. I showed her the photograph of Dr. Hendrick's email, the evidence I'd found of Dad's systematic planning. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. Alex, she said finally, this isn't just family drama. What you're describing is criminal conspiracy. Your father orchestrated your arrest, he's planning to have you involuntarily committed based on fabricated evidence, and he's doing it to cover up, what exactly? You said you found files, but what was in them? I hesitated. The financial crimes, the Pentagon contracts, Mom's pharmaceutical cover-ups, it felt like betraying family secrets, even though those secrets could destroy lives. But looking at Emma's serious expression, I realized she wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was thinking like a lawyer's daughter. Tax evasion, at minimum. 30 million moved to offshore accounts over 3 years. But also defense contract fraud, defective equipment sold to military bases. And pharmaceutical safety violations that could kill people. Emma's eyes widened. Jesus, Alex. We're not talking about white-collar crime anymore. If soldiers die because of faulty equipment your father knowingly sold. She trailed off, shaking her head. No wonder he's willing to have you committed. You're not just a rebellious daughter, you're a witness to potential manslaughter. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Manslaughter. I'd been thinking in terms of corruption and fraud, but Emma was right. The defective body armor heading to Forward Operating Base Chapman wasn't just a financial crime, it was a ticking time bomb that could kill American soldiers. Including my cousin Jake. My dad specializes in corporate whistleblower cases, Emma continued, her voice taking on the rapid-fire cadence she used when her mind was racing. But this is bigger than corporate fraud. This is federal crime territory, FBI, Pentagon investigations, congressional hearings level stuff. The evidence is gone. Dad found everything I'd collected. Maybe not everything. Emma pulled out her phone and started scrolling through contacts. You said you photographed some documents earlier? Before tonight? I nodded, pulling out my phone. The photos were still there, wire transfer receipts, the handwritten note about Mom's conscience being a liability, Dad's journal entry about permanent measures for dealing with my curiosity. Emma's expression grew grim as she scrolled through them. This is enough for a preliminary investigation, but you're right that you need the originals for anything formal. The question is whether there's time to get them before. Her phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the early morning quiet. The caller ID showed Dad Mobile. At 2:47 a.m. Emma frowned, then answered. Dad? Why are you, what? No, I'm at the office, I couldn't sleep so wait, slow down. I watched her face change as she listened, color draining from her cheeks. Yeah, she's here with me. No, Dad, listen to me. You need to come in right now. Bring the Whitmore case files. She met my eyes across the desk. Because Richard Blackwood just made a very serious mistake. She hung up and looked at me with something between sympathy and determination. Your father called my dad 20 minutes ago. He wants to retain Chen, Morrison and Associates to handle your psychiatric evaluation and ensure that legal proceedings go smoothly. He offered a $200,000 retainer. What did your dad say? Emma's smile was sharp as a blade. He said he'd be delighted to take the case. And then he started recording the call. David Chen arrived at his office at 3:23 a.m. looking like he'd thrown on the first clothes he could find, khakis wrinkled from sleep, a Yale Law sweatshirt, and wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew. But his eyes were sharp and alert, the look of someone who'd built a career on late-night crisis management. Alexandra, he said, settling behind his desk with a steaming coffee cup that smelled like it could wake the dead. Your father just made what might be the most legally reckless phone call of his career. He pulled out a small digital recorder and set it between us. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recording phone conversations. Your father doesn't know I documented our chat, which means I have him on record attempting to retain legal services for what amounts to conspiracy to commit fraud. What exactly did he say? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. David pressed play. Dad's voice filled the office, smooth and confident. David, I need your firm to handle a delicate family matter. My daughter is experiencing some psychological difficulties, making wild accusations, showing signs of paranoid delusion. I need someone I trust to ensure the psychiatric evaluation process goes smoothly and that any unfortunate claims she might make are properly contextualized as symptoms of her condition. Contextualized, Emma repeated flatly. He literally asked Dad to help cover up your accusations by framing them as mental illness. The recording continued. I'm prepared to offer a $200,000 retainer for your discretion and expertise in these matters. The evaluation is scheduled for Tuesday with Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Fairfield Hills. I just need to ensure Alexandra's stories don't cause unnecessary complications for the family. David stopped the playback. At that point, I realized Richard Blackwood was either asking me to participate in a conspiracy or walking into a legal trap. So I started asking questions. He fast-forwarded the recording. Richard, when you say stories, what specifically are you referring to? I need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Dad's voice again, financial conspiracy theories, mostly. She's convinced herself that routine business transactions are somehow criminal. Last night she accused me of tax evasion, bribery, even suggested I was endangering military personnel through defense contracts. Complete fabrications, obviously, but the kind of detailed delusions that could cause problems if taken seriously by the wrong people. My blood ran cold. Dad had just confessed to David Chen that I'd accused him of specific crimes, and his only defense was claiming I was delusional. But to any reasonable lawyer, that would raise the question, how could a mentally ill teenager fabricate such detailed accusations unless she'd seen something real? Your father made a critical error, David continued. He assumed I'd take his money and help him silence you. Instead, he just provided me with probable cause to believe you might be telling the truth about his criminal activities. So what happens now? I asked. David leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Now I have a professional obligation to report suspected criminal activity to the appropriate authorities. But more importantly, I have grounds to file for emergency injunctive relief to prevent your involuntary commitment. Emma pulled out her laptop and started typing rapidly. Emergency motion to prevent psychiatric commitment based on evidence of parental coercion and potential criminal conspiracy. We can file it electronically and have it before a judge by 9 a.m. But what about the evidence? Dad has all the files from his safe. David smiled grimly. That's where your father's arrogance works against him. He called me at 2:47 a.m. demanding immediate legal services for a Tuesday psychiatric evaluation. That suggests urgency, and urgency suggests consciousness of guilt. Combined with the specificity of the accusations he claims you're making, any reasonable investigator will want to know why Richard Blackwood is so desperate to have his daughter declared mentally incompetent right now. My phone buzzed with a text, *, hope you're getting some rest, sweetheart. Big day tomorrow. The helicopter will be here at 7 a.m. sharp. Dad, *. 7 a.m. 4 hours from now. He moved up the timeline again, I said, showing them the message. He's not waiting for Monday or Tuesday anymore. Emma and her father exchanged looks. He knows, David said. Somehow he knows you've reached out for help, and he's accelerating his plan. How could he know? House security system, Emma suggested. If he was monitoring when you left. My stomach dropped as I realized she was right. Dad's paranoia about security meant cameras everywhere, motion sensors, automatic alerts. He'd know exactly when I left the house, and probably assumed the worst about where I'd gone. So what do we do? I asked. He still has all the evidence, he still controls Dr. Hendricks, and now he's sending a helicopter to collect me in less than 4 hours. David stood and walked to his window, looking out at the pre-dawn darkness over Hartford. We do what your father doesn't expect, he said finally. We go on the offensive. He turned back to us with the expression I'd seen him wear in court, the look of a predator who just spotted weakness in his opponent. Richard Blackwood wants to play games with psychiatric evaluations and military schools. Fine. Let's see how he handles a federal fraud investigation landing on his desk at the same time that helicopter arrives. David Chen's plan was elegant in its simplicity. If Dad wanted to play the concerned parent card, we'd force him to do it under federal scrutiny. The key is timing, David explained as Emma drafted legal documents on her laptop. Your father expects to have you in that helicopter by 7 a.m., before anyone can interfere. But if the FBI shows up at Blackwood Industries at 6:30 a.m. with a warrant, suddenly his priority shifts from managing you to managing a federal investigation. I watched Emma's fingers fly across the keyboard, crafting an emergency motion that could save my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same legal system Dad had manipulated for decades was about to become my shield. But we still need more evidence than phone photos, I said. Dad's not stupid enough to keep incriminating files where a warrant could easily find them. Actually, David pulled up something on his computer, he might be. Corporate executives like your father suffer from a particular kind of arrogance. They assume their legitimate business operations provide cover for their illegal ones. He turned his screen toward me, showing a database search result. Blackwood Industries filed their quarterly SEC reports last month. Public record, completely legal. But look at this line item under Consulting Services, $2.7 million to Meridian Holdings LLC. My breath caught. That's one of the shell companies. I photographed a wire transfer to them for $2.3 million. Exactly. Your father reported his money laundering to the Securities and Exchange Commission, probably figuring that hiding illegal transfers in plain sight made them look legitimate. David's smile was predatory. But if we can prove Meridian Holdings is a shell company with no actual business operations, those SEC filings become evidence of securities fraud in addition to tax evasion. Emma looked up from her laptop. Emergency motion is ready to file, but Dad's right about needing more evidence. The photos are compelling, but defense lawyers will argue they could be fabricated. My phone buzzed again. * car will pick you up at 6:45 for helicopter transport. Pack light, Whitmore provides everything you'll need. Looking forward to your fresh start. Dad *. 6:45 a.m. The timeline kept accelerating. There might be another way to get the evidence, I said slowly. Dad's paranoid about digital security, but he's also obsessive about documentation. Every major transaction, every important conversation, he keeps physical backups. Where? David asked. His office at Blackwood Industries. There's a vault in the basement, climate-controlled, fireproof. He calls it the corporate memory bank. If the really damaging files aren't in his home safe anymore, they're probably there. Emma frowned. Getting into a corporate building at 4 a.m. isn't exactly legal. We don't need to break in, I realized. I have legitimate access. I'm Richard Blackwood's daughter, my fingerprints are in their security system for family visits, the guards know me. I felt a surge of dark satisfaction. Dad's nepotism might actually work against him. David was already reaching for his coat. If you can access those files, Emma and I can file the emergency motions and contact the FBI simultaneously. By the time your father realizes what's happening, there will be too many moving pieces for him to control. And if I get caught? Then you're in the same position you'd be in if you do nothing, Emma pointed out. At least this way, you're fighting back. She was right. The helicopter would come at 6:45 a.m. regardless. Dr. Hendricks would conduct her predetermined evaluation on Tuesday regardless. My only choice was between going down fighting or going down quietly. Okay, I said, standing up. Let's burn down Richard Blackwood's empire. David handed me his business card. The moment you have those files, call Emma. She'll conference in the FBI tip line and will make the reports simultaneously from multiple locations. Harder for your father to claim it's a coordinated delusion if the evidence comes from his own corporate vault. As I headed for the elevator, Emma called out, Alex. Your cousin Jake, the one at the army base. Maybe give him a heads up too. If Dad's equipment really is defective. I nodded, my throat tight. Jake deserved to know that his own family had put him in danger. The elevator doors closed at 4:17 a.m., and I descended toward the parking garage where my BMW waited. In less than 3 hours, Richard Blackwood would discover that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating his daughter. It was teaching her to be exactly like him. The Blackwood Industries building stood like a monument to corporate power against the pre-dawn sky, 43 stories of steel and glass that had always made me feel small. But walking through the marble lobby at 4:31 a.m., I felt different. Dangerous, maybe. Like I'd finally inherited the right Blackwood trait. The night security guard, Marcus, looked up from his crossword puzzle with surprise. Miss Alexandra? Bit early for a visit, isn't it? Couldn't sleep, I said, forcing my father's easy smile. Thought I'd grab some files from Dad's office for a school project. You know how he loves when I show interest in the family business. Marcus chuckled and waved me toward the elevator bank. Your dad'll be proud. 42nd floor, right? Actually, I need something from the archives downstairs first. Dad mentioned some historical documents about great-grandfather Edmund's steel contracts. The lie came so naturally it scared me. But Marcus just nodded and handed me a temporary access card for the basement levels. Vaults in B3. You need me to escort you down? I'll be fine. Thanks, Marcus. The elevator descended past the parking garage, past the building's mechanical levels, to the basement archive that few employees even knew existed. The doors opened onto a climate-controlled corridor lined with industrial storage units, each one secured with biometric scanners and enough steel to stop a tank. Vault 7 was marked Executive Archives, R. Blackwood. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, holding my breath until it beeped green. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves held bankers' boxes organized by year and category. Pentagon contracts 2019 to 2022. Offshore transfers, Cayman. FDA correspondence, confidential. Everything I needed, cataloged with the obsessive precision that had made Richard Blackwood worth $340 million. I grabbed my phone and started photographing everything, but new images wouldn't be enough. Emma was right about needing originals. I pulled down 3 boxes and started filling a canvas bag with the most damning documents: contracts for defective body armor worth $15 million, email chains discussing bribes to FDA inspectors, bank records showing $47 million in unreported offshore transfers. At the bottom of the Pentagon box, I found something that made my blood freeze, a shipping manifest dated 2 weeks ago. Destination, Forward Operating Base Chapman, Afghanistan. Contents, 500 units of level IIIA body armor, manufactured by Blackwood Defense Systems. Jake's base. The defective armor had already been shipped. My hands shook as I photographed the manifest, then kept digging. There had to be more, some way to trace the equipment, to warn the soldiers before. Finding everything you need, Alexandra. I spun around to find Dad standing in the vault doorway, still wearing his business suit from yesterday but looking like he hadn't slept. His expression was calm, almost proud, like he'd been expecting this exact moment. The motion sensors alerted me the moment you entered the building, he continued, stepping inside and closing the vault door behind him. Did you really think I wouldn't monitor my own corporate headquarters? The canvas bag full of evidence suddenly felt like a lead weight in my hands. Dad, the equipment you sent to Jake's base is performing exactly as designed, he interrupted. Level IIIA armor stops handgun rounds and most rifle rounds. The fact that it fails against armor-piercing ammunition isn't a defect, it's a specification limitation. You told General Peterson it met full military standards. I told him it met 80% of specifications, which it does. The other 20% was cost-prohibitive. Dad's tone remained conversational, like we were discussing quarterly earnings instead of soldiers' lives. Jake and his unit have better protection than they had before. That's what matters. Better protection that might get them killed. Everyone dies eventually, Alexandra. The question is whether their death serves a purpose. He held out his hand. The files, please. I clutched the bag tighter. No. Marcus is already calling the police about a break-in. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. But if you return those files now, I can tell him it was just a family misunderstanding. My phone showed 5:23 a.m. The helicopter would arrive in an hour and 22 minutes. You won't have me arrested, I said, praying I was right. Too many questions. Too much scrutiny. Dad's smile was arctic. You're right. I won't have you arrested. He pulled out his phone and pressed a number. Dr. Hendricks. Richard Blackwood. I need that psychiatric evaluation moved up to this morning. Emergency situation. Yes, I have her contained, but she's become violent and delusional. Armed and dangerous. Potentially. Armed and dangerous. The letter opener in my hoodie pocket suddenly felt like a weapon, like evidence that would support whatever story Dad was building. She's in my corporate vault right now, stealing classified documents and making threats against military personnel, Dad continued into the phone. I'll need a full psychological evaluation and emergency commitment authorization. I realized with crystal clarity that Richard Blackwood had just shifted from controlling me to destroying me completely. There would be no military school, no psychiatric evaluation, no chance for appeals or legal challenges. He was going to have me declared criminally insane and locked away forever. Unless I beat him to the next move. My finger was already moving across my phone screen before Dad finished his call to Dr. Hendricks. While he painted me as an armed and dangerous psychotic, I opened the group text with Emma and her father and hit the camera icon. Emergency. He's here. Sending everything now. I rapid-fired photos of every document in my hands, the shipping manifest to Jake's base, the bribery receipts, the offshore account statements. Dad was so focused on his performance for Dr. Hendricks that he didn't notice me documenting his crimes in real time. Yes, she's making specific threats about military equipment failures. Completely detached from reality. Dad's voice carried that perfect note of paternal concern that had fooled doctors, teachers, and family friends for years. My phone buzzed with Emma's response, "Got them. Dad's calling FBI now. Keep him talking. Keep him talking." I could do that. "The Peterson contracts," I said loudly, pulling out a file marked confidential. "The ones where you promised full-spec armor and delivered training-grade equipment instead." Dad's eyes flicked to me, but he continued his call. "She's reading from stolen corporate documents now, Doctor. The paranoid delusions are escalating. General Peterson paid $47 million for level 4 plates rated for armor-piercing rounds," I continued, my voice carrying in the vault's acoustics. "But you ship level IIIA ceramic that fragments on impact with standard rifle ammunition." "Yes, I'll bring her directly to Fairfield Hills," Dad said into the phone. No police involvement, this needs to be handled medically, not criminally." My phone showed 5:31 a.m. 8 texts from Emma in the past 3 minutes. FBI agent Rodriguez is en route to Blackwood Industries. Emergency injunction filed electronically. Dad's calling Hartford PD to intercept helicopter. Keep documenting everything. Jake's commanding officer has been notified. DOD opening investigation into Blackwood defense contracts. You did it, Alex. Hold on, help is coming. Dad ended his call and looked at me with something approaching admiration. Very clever, Alexandra. But you're forgetting that I've been playing this game since before you were born. He pulled out a second phone, one I'd never seen before, and pressed a single number. The package needs to be delivered immediately. Yes, I know it's early. Change of circumstances. Package. My blood ran cold as I realized what he meant. You're not taking me to Dr. Hendricks, are you? Dr. Hendricks will receive a very sad call in about an hour, Dad said, pocketing both phones. Tragic news about my daughter's mental breakdown. How she stole corporate documents, made terrorist threats against military installations, then disappeared into the night before we could get her help. The vault door stood open behind him, but I knew he was faster, stronger, and had spent 47 years perfecting the art of making problems disappear permanently. The Cayman accounts, I said desperately. Meridian Holdings, Cyprus Financial, Dover Bay Enterprises. 47 million in transfers over 18 months. I've documented all of it. And when you vanish tonight, those documents will be dismissed as the fabricated evidence of a disturbed teenager with an overactive imagination. Dad checked his watch. The boat leaves Mystic Harbor in 43 minutes. International waters by sunrise. Boat. Not helicopter to military school. Not psychiatric hospital. A boat to international waters where problems could be solved permanently and bodies disappeared forever. My phone buzzed one more time. Emma, asterisk building surrounded. FBI, Hartford PD, Federal Marshals. Whatever happens, don't let him take you out of that vault, asterisk. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw Richard Blackwood clearly for the first time in my life. Not a controlling parent or corrupt businessman, but something far more dangerous. A man who would murder his own daughter to protect his empire. The FBI is already in the building, Dad, I said quietly. It's over. His smile never wavered. No, Alexandra. It's just beginning. Dad pulled the third phone from his jacket, a burner I'd never seen before, and the sound that emerged wasn't a ringtone but a deep mechanical rumble that seemed to come from the building itself. Emergency lockdown protocol activated, an automated voice announced through hidden speakers. All elevator systems disabled. Stairwell access restricted. Please remain calm and await further instructions. The vault door slammed shut with a pneumatic hiss, sealing us inside the climate-controlled tomb of Dad's secrets. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Impressive FBI response time, Dad said conversationally, checking his Patek Philippe. But Blackwood Industries was designed by someone who spent 30 years thinking about contingency plans. This vault is rated to survive a nuclear attack, Alexandra. A few federal agents with badges aren't going to be a problem. My phone showed no signal. The vault was a Faraday cage, blocking all electromagnetic communications. Whatever Emma and her father were doing outside, I was cut off from help. The lockdown won't last forever, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Eventually they'll find a way in. Eventually, yes. But not soon enough to matter. Dad opened a concealed panel in the vault wall, revealing what looked like a military-grade communications system. Hardwired connection to a private satellite network. Completely bypasses local infrastructure. He typed rapidly on a ruggedized keyboard, and multiple screens came alive showing camera feeds from throughout the building. FBI agents in tactical gear filled the lobby. Hartford PD had cordoned off the street. Federal marshals were setting up a command post in the parking garage. Quite the show of force, Dad mused. Agent Rodriguez is competent, I've worked with her before on some Pentagon procurement issues. She'll want to negotiate, establish communication, follow proper hostage protocols. I'm not a hostage. I'm your daughter. Biologically, yes. But practically speaking, you became a security threat the moment you started documenting classified business operations. Dad pulled up another screen showing financial markets data. Blackwood Industries stock is down 12% in pre-market trading. Someone leaked news of the FBI investigation. I watched the red numbers cascade down the screen, billions in market capitalization vanishing in real time. Dad's empire was crumbling, and somehow he seemed almost pleased about it. You wanted this, I realized. You wanted me to find the evidence, to trigger an investigation. I wanted to see what you were capable of when properly motivated. Dad opened one of his filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder marked Succession Planning. Richard Blackwood built an empire, but empires need heirs worthy of inheriting them. Your brothers were disappointments, too soft, too ethical, too concerned with public opinion. My brothers. David and Michael, who'd both died in that car accident when I was 8. The accident that had made me Dad's only remaining child, his sole heir. The accident that had never made sense because David was the most careful driver in the family. The brake line failure in David's Mercedes, I whispered. That wasn't an accident. Your brothers would have run Blackwood Industries into bankruptcy within a decade. Too much conscience, not enough pragmatism. Dad's tone remained matter-of-fact, like we were discussing quarterly projections. But you, Alexandra, you have the instincts. The ruthlessness. Tonight proved that. My legs gave out and I sank onto one of the archive boxes, the full horror of my family's reality crashing over me. Dad hadn't just killed business rivals and destroyed his own father. He'd murdered my brothers to ensure I would be his heir. The FBI won't negotiate with a child killer, I managed. The FBI will never prove what happened to David and Michael. Just like they'll never prove what happens to you. Dad checked another screen showing a countdown timer, 23:47. 23:46, 23:45. What happens in 23 minutes? Dad's smile was genuinely warm for the first time I could remember. Your final test begins. The countdown timer hit 0 at exactly 6:08 a.m., and suddenly the vault filled with a hissing sound that made my skin crawl. Dad pulled on what looked like a military gas mask from his emergency panel, his voice now muffled but still terrifyingly calm. Nitrogen displacement system, he explained. Originally designed for fire suppression, but it has other applications. You have approximately 4 minutes of consciousness before hypoxia sets in. 8 minutes until permanent brain damage. 12 minutes until death. The air was already tasting different, thinner, somehow. My vision started to blur at the edges as oxygen levels dropped. Dad stood there watching me with clinical interest, like I was a lab rat in one of Mom's pharmaceutical trials. But he'd made one crucial mistake. You're right about me having your instincts, I gasped, pulling the letter opener from my hoodie pocket. But you forgot that I also learned from watching you. Instead of threatening him with it, I jammed the blade into the satellite communication system, sparking and shattering the screens in a shower of electricity. Dad lunged forward, but I was already moving to the emergency panel, stabbing at every button and switch I could reach. The nitrogen system gave a mechanical wheeze and stopped. Emergency ventilation kicked in with a roar. And most importantly, the vault door's magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy thunk. You little, Dad started, but his words were cut off by the sound of boots thundering down the corridor outside. The vault door burst open and FBI agent Rodriguez appeared with a tactical team, weapons drawn, faces grim behind bulletproof visors. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about 15 other federal charges we're still counting. Dad pulled off his gas mask with dignity intact, straightening his tie like he was heading into a board meeting instead of a federal prison. Agent Rodriguez. I assume you have warrants for this dramatic entrance. We have warrants, witness testimony, financial records, and about 3 hours of recorded confessions thanks to your daughter's phone transmitting through the building's emergency communication system before you activated the lockdown. Rodriguez stepped aside as paramedics rushed in to check my oxygen levels. The whole thing went out live to our field office. My phone. I'd forgotten that Emma's father had set up a conference call with the FBI tip line. When Dad started his lockdown and confessions, everything had been transmitted directly to Agent Rodriguez's team. Additionally, Rodriguez continued, we have testimony from General Peterson about your defense contracts, cooperation from 3 Cayman Islands banks, and a very angry call from the Pentagon about defective body armor that was recalled from Afghanistan about 2 hours ago. Jake was safe. The equipment had been recalled. As they led Dad away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. I'm proud of you, Alexandra. You finally showed the killer instinct necessary to run this family's empire. There won't be a family empire, I called after him. I'm liquidating everything and donating the money to veterans organizations and pharmaceutical safety research. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard Blackwood looked genuinely shocked. 6 months later, I was testifying before a Senate subcommittee on defense contractor oversight, sitting across from senators who hung on every word as I detailed the systematic corruption my father had built. The Blackwood Industries bankruptcy had freed $340 million for victims' compensation and safety improvements. I was living with Emma's family, legally emancipated, attending Hartford High like a normal teenager. No more designer clothes or luxury cars, but also no more lies or manipulation or fear. The best part? I'd kept one thing from Dad's empire, his lesson about playing the long game. The federal investigation I'd triggered had exposed corruption networks spanning 3 decades, bringing down dozens of his associates and business partners. Richard Blackwood had finally gotten the heir he deserved. One ruthless enough to destroy everything he'd built.